Chilling details that defy logic. About Custer's last stand uncovered. First-hand testimony. In the shadow of the Little Bighorn River, on June 25, 1876, a dark and tragic episode of American history took place. The infamous last stand of General George Custer and his troops. Chaos and confusion ruled the day, as described by eyewitnesses who witnessed the grim end of Custer and his men. This account sheds light on the horrifying realities faced by the soldiers, including George Herendine and John Berkman, as they fought against an overwhelming force of Native American warriors. Their accounts reveal the brutal truth of that fateful day, which history has long distorted with myth. As these men faced the relentless attack, not only did they confront the immediate danger of battle, but they also wrestled with a gnawing uncertainty surrounding their leader's fate. The Little Bighorn River lay within sight, yet their desperate thirst only added to their torment, forcing them to endure unthinkable conditions. War cries and gunshots echoed through the valley, mingling with the distant wails of mourning from native tribes, creating an eerie and surreal atmosphere during the struggle. Through their eyes, the harrowing events of that day unfold, exposing moments of both cowardice and immense bravery, amidst the eerie calm that followed the storm of violence. What really transpired at Custer's last stand? How did so many men fall? And what decisions led to such a devastating defeat? In this telling, we uncover the grim details that defy logic, as told by those who survived, to share their memories of that fateful clash. But before we delve deeper into this grim tale, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel to support our work. Our journey began on June 22nd, when we departed the Rosebud at noon. After marching up the Rosebud about 12 miles, we made camp for the night at dawn. On June 23rd, we continued our march, following a trail for several miles, until by late evening, we had established camp on the trail. On the following day, 6 Crow Scouts, sent out earlier by General Custer, returned with news that they had found fresh pony tracks, indicating an Indian village nearby. General Custer gathered his officers. Although I couldn't hear their discussion, the scouts were sent ahead once more. Around 4 o'clock, we reached an abandoned village site, where we set up camp just 2 miles below the forks of the Rosebud. The scouts were dispatched again, and by 11 that night, Custer ordered the camp to be packed and marched up the right fork of the Rosebud. By dawn, the scouts reported they had spotted the village. We concealed ourselves in a ravine near the creek's headwaters, around 3 miles from the divide, where the scouts had spotted the village. General Custer galloped ahead with his orderlies to scout the area, but returned an hour later claiming he saw nothing. However, Nook Bayer, a half-breed guide in the scouts, insisted the village lay ahead. The scouts warned that they had been discovered, and Sioux war parties had spotted our forces. Custer then gave orders to prepare for battle. We continued forward cautiously, advancing along a small creek for about 6 miles. We came upon a single Indian lodge containing a dead Indian near the entrance of the Little Horn Valley, where clouds of dust rose 5 miles away. General Custer seemed to believe the Indians were retreating and ordered a message to be sent to Colonel Reno, commanding him to push the scouts toward the dust. Reno led his men across the river at a natural ford and advanced on the prairie. After a mile, his troops dismounted to fight on foot, while sending their horses into the trees. Mounted Indians soon charged across the prairie, and Reno's skirmishers quickly returned fire. However, as the enemy began moving to cut him off from the ford, Reno ordered a retreat to the trees. The Sioux pursued relentlessly, firing at close range and cutting off any chance of a safe retreat. Soldiers and horses alike fell, and those left behind scrambled for safety. I saw around 13 soldiers, some wounded, and convinced them to take cover in the trees. Although the wounded soldiers were eager to escape, I advised them to stay and fight. Experience had taught me that this situation was not beyond hope. We remained in the bush for hours, hearing the distant sounds of battle, unaware it was Custer's command, engaged with the native forces. When the shooting eventually quieted, I urged the soldiers to move. Though some chose to stay, a small group of us forded the river and rejoined Reno's command on the bluffs. Just as the Indians swarmed from Custer's battle, Reno's men fortified their position as darkness fell, using whatever they could: saddles, packs, and dead horses at dawn. The Indians renewed their attack, charging multiple times, even throwing stones at our men. Captain Benton rallied his troops, launching an unexpected offensive that surprised the attacking Indians. His courage, standing firm in the line of fire, saved many lives that day. By mid-morning, the men began begging for water, having gone without for 36 hours in the scorching heat. Many were dehydrated, their tongues swollen. Yet the battle raged on with no relief in sight. The men attempted to eat crackers and hardtack, but lacked enough saliva to moisten them. Some resorted to chewing grass, but it clung to their lips, and none of them could spit or speak clearly. The wounded were said to be dying from dehydration, prompting several soldiers to volunteer for a dangerous mission to the river. Knowing they might not return, we were engaged in battle on the bluffs, about 700 yards from the river, with a ravine running from the battlefield to the water's edge. To reach the ravine, the men had to sprint across an exposed area of about 100 yards all the while, under fire from Indians positioned on the bluffs. Around 50 soldiers dashed across the open ground and made it into the ravine. When they reached the bottom, they found it guarded by Indians, stationed in the timber across the river. Soldiers could approach the water to within about 30 feet while under cover, but stepping out onto the bank meant facing a barrage of fire from the Indians. Nevertheless, the soldiers faced the danger head-on. Some dashed down to the river with camp kettles, filled them, and sought refuge in the bend of the ravine behind rocks where canteens were filled, and passed back up the hill. Before the men and wounded were fully supplied, one soldier was killed, and 6 or 7 others were wounded in the attempt. One man had the bone in his leg shattered by a bullet, requiring an amputation later on. By 2 o'clock the Indians began to withdraw. Although skirmishing continued until late in the afternoon, by nightfall the battlefield was clear of Indian forces. Finally, we could bring water to the animals, many of which were on the brink of death, and allow them to graze that evening. Colonel Reno repositioned and fortified a stronger and higher location. We anticipated another Indian attack the next day, but by morning there were no Indians in sight. The soldiers felt confident that help was on the way, and around 10 o'clock we received word that General Terry, with a large force, was approaching the valley just 6 miles away. Soon we saw his troops advancing in response to questions. Mr. Handon recounted his position. He had gone in with the scouts on the left side of Reno's line, which included around 60 men, 35 Re-Indians, 6 friendly Sioux, 6 Crows, and the remainder white men. He witnessed a Re-scout raise his arm with a bloody knife before falling over, likely killed, Hayden believed. The 2 cavalry soldiers he had left in the timber were also killed, as they hadn't been seen since. Lieutenant McIntosh, whose horse was shot early in the fight, was killed while riding a soldier's horse, trying to make it back to the ford. Hylden also saw Lieutenant Hodson, who was shot and wounded after his horse fell into the river. Hodson tried to pull himself up the opposite bank by grabbing a horse's tail, but was shot by an Indian sharpshooter once he reached the top. Custer's supply packs were with the others, and the Indians did not manage to capture any of them, or the mules. Most of Custer's horses were killed during the battle, and Hayden doubted that the Indians captured more than 100 animals. He suspected some men were captured alive and tortured. He believed the colored scout, Isaiah Dorman, was tortured, as he had small bullet wounds in his legs, suggesting they were inflicted while he was still alive. Another man had strips of skin cut from his body. Many squaws and elderly Indians roamed the battlefield. Howling in madness, they carried stone mallets and smashed the skulls of both the dead and wounded, cutting some with knives and mutilating their bodies. The heads of 4 white soldiers were later found in the Sioux camp, but their bodies were missing. Our men didn't kill any squaws, but the Rhea scouts did. As the bodies of 6 squaws were found in a ravine, Handon estimated that the Indian village housed around 6,000 people, with at least 3,000 being warriors. The Indians fought Reno first, before turning to engage Custer, and later returned to finish off Reno. The same group of Indians participated in all the attacks, and Hayden believed they were led by Sitting Bull, along with 8 or 9 other chiefs. He identified 5 of the chiefs, each of whom carried a flag to rally their warriors. The flags were of various colors: red, yellow, white, blue, and one black, hand in thought. Crazy Horse and his band also took part in the battle and speculated that the Indians suffered casualties equal to those of the whites. Custer's men fought valiantly, killing many Indians, but none of Custer's forces escaped. They were surrounded by at least 25 warriors. Scout George Herendine described how fear spread among the men due to Reno's apparent cowardice, which influenced their actions. Don Neely, now living in Gillette Edge, Montana, had been dubbed Crackerbox Den for hiding behind a cracker box during the battle. Captain Miles Moreland, known as Aparejo Mickey, spent the fight lying behind an aparejo, and Billy Blake pretended to be wounded for 2 days to avoid combat. These men, though brave soldiers by nature, acted out of fear during the heat of battle. In contrast, Herendine worked tirelessly in the intense heat, dragging dead horses to form breastworks and firing at the Indians, all while wondering what had happened to Custer. On the morning of the 25th, as the soldiers worked, they noticed smoke and dust on the nearby ridge. Most of the Indians left Reno's men to join the fight. On the ridge, some soldiers speculated that Custer was engaging the Indians, but when the smoke and dust cleared and the shots ceased, they feared the worst. Despite hearing volleys of gunfire, which many now believe were Custer's distress signals, the soldiers didn't advance to aid him. Herendine and others were left behind, thirsting for water and grappling with the heat. Dr. Porter, who worked relentlessly to care for the wounded, urged the men to retrieve water, even though the river was guarded by the Indians. Several soldiers made the dangerous trek down the ravine to the river, risking their lives to bring back water for the wounded. One man was shot while filling his pail, shattering his leg, and he had to be dragged back up the hill. As the day wore on, a few soldiers managed to bring back just enough water to ease the suffering of the wounded. Despite the men's desperate thirst, Herendine refrained from trying again. He witnessed several horses, including Dandy, shot and killed during the fight. Dandy was hit back in '68, and I thought to myself, the general is going to be heartbroken when I break the news about him being gone. I recalled how just before we left Fort Lincoln, Custer mentioned he might need to replace Dandy as he was starting to show his age. But seeing Dandy lying there, as if he were just sleeping, it reminded me of all the times he'd raced across the plains with Custer. It brought tears to my eyes as I gently stroked his neck. Then, to my surprise, he opened his eyes soft, filled with pain, and let out a quiet whiny. I knew then that he was pleading for water. Confused as to why I hadn't tended to him, like always the day stretched on endlessly, every minute feeling like an hour, as we remained stranded unsure of Custer's whereabouts. We feared the Indians would strike from behind at any moment, especially since we had no natural barriers there. Looking back on that day now, it almost seems like a nightmare, something that couldn't possibly have happened. There are moments when I convince myself it's all just a bad dream. Maybe someday I'll wake up, be young again back with the 7th, tending to Blush, Tuck, Vic, and Dandy. Perhaps Miss Libby will be there, and General Custer will be nearby, wearing his trademark white hat, laughing and joking as usual. But deep down, I know the dream won't end until I find the courage to face the truth. On both the 25th and 26th, while the Indians below fired at us, a sharpshooter perched on a nearby hill picked off our men one by one. Armed with a buffalo gun, he was deadly accurate. Though we couldn't see him, every shot took out a man, horse or mule. He proved to be more of a threat than the warriors below eventually. Captain Ryan managed to take him down with a long-range rifle. After the battle, I ventured over to that hill and saw the sharpshooter lying there, his buffalo gun still in hand, behind the boulders he had set up for cover. As the day wore on and the smoke started to clear, most of the Indians pulled back, returning to their village to mourn their dead. They left just enough warriors to keep us trapped on the hill. By that point, none of us had eaten since leaving camp with Custer. Earlier in the day, we chewed on hardtack and raw bacon, but without water, it was like swallowing hay. Most of us were utterly spent, with some men collapsing where they stood, too exhausted to care about what might come next. I had the unlucky task of being on night watch. Stationed outside Reno's tent, I heard him inside drinking heavily from a keg. At one point as I marched past, I overheard him tell another officer, I wonder where the Murat of the American Army is now," followed by a sneering laugh. Though I didn't know who Murat was, I knew Reno was mocking Custer, and it angered me as I continued my patrol. I passed by the sleeping men scattered on the ground, while others, those who hadn't survived, lay motionless beside them. The night had grown eerily quiet down in the valley. Where there had been gunfire, smoke, and chaos all day, it was now as silent as a graveyard. I could hear the distant beat of tom-toms, and the mournful wails of the Indians, grieving their fallen. Every now and then, I'd stop marching, straining my ears and eyes, hoping to catch a sound or sight of Custer and his men creeping toward us in the dark. I kept glancing toward the ridge where we last saw him, my body aching from the constant worry. But as the night wore on, nothing happened, and when morning finally broke, the air was still and heavy tension hung over us like a cloud. As we waited for whatever might come next, the lack of food and water was taking its toll on everyone. Some men mumbled incoherently in their sleep, while others sat in silence, lost in thought. My mind drifted back to Custer and my horse Dandy. I remembered the moment he was shot, and how I felt such an overwhelming sadness. That sorrow stayed with me, making it harder to shake the sense that we were doomed, that the worst was yet to come. The eerie calmness was unsettling, and we knew we had to be prepared for whatever was on the horizon. I hope this retelling of the events gives you a deeper insight into the Battle of Little Bighorn and the Great Sioux War of 1876. Stick around for more stories like this. I'll continue to bring you first-hand accounts of different battles. Take care, and I'll see you next time.